You've become a household name for so many of us because of your many, many books that sit on our shelves. How did you get into writing? You came from a home where was there an emphasis on any kind of writing? Did your mother write? Did your father write?
No.
Did you have a teacher that encouraged you? How did you recognize that you had the capacity to synthesize things and put them down on paper? Where'd that come from?
It's an unusual story. I never thought of writing in my growing up years. The one thing my parents did, even my dad, who considered himself an uneducated man, he read to us all the time. He taught us to love books. And I still owe a great debt of gratitude to libraries because we went to the library all the time. And so I learned to love books. But then when we went to Southern California, after I finished my master's, I was teaching and I got interested in the Second Coming. I started collecting quotes, and then I'd use them in class or firesides and so on. And people would come up and say, well, where do we find those quotes? And I said, oh, BYU library, Well, that's not very helpful. Why don't you write a book? And finally I thought, yeah, maybe I will. So basically I got into writing because I love to teach. And writing's another way to teach, in a sneaky way. You get a huge classroom. And yeah. Writing fiction, I wish I could give you this really spiritual story, but one day my wife and I were getting ready for bed, and our oldest by now was a senior. And she said, Jerry, you know that Cindy wants to go to BYU next year. I said, yeah. Just how did you plan to pay for that? I mean, we're still seminary teachers. And I said, I've been thinking it'd be kind of fun to write a novel. If I could just get the right idea, I'd maybe try and write a novel. And she said, well, you love Israel. Why don't you write a novel about Israel? And bingo, that was, as soon as she said it, I thought, yeah, why don't I? And so that became the first fiction I wrote.
Interesting.
Yep.
And you were successful?
Yeah.
Because there wasn't a lot of that
No.
at that time. I mean, you really did kind of pioneer that genre for the church, writing.
Yeah, there were some Shirley Seeley and, some of those early pioneers that started opening up the way. But here's an interesting story, and I've kidded both Bookcraft and Deseret Book about this. When I wrote The Coming of the Lord, which is the first book, I sent it to Deseret Book. And they kept it for several months and finally wrote back and said, we like your manuscript, but our publication schedule's full. Thank you very much. I was devastated. So somebody said, well, why don't you send it to Bookcraft? So I did, and I got an answer back in about 3 weeks saying, we love it. We're going to go with it. When I finally, a few years later, decided to go with the novel, I, of course, went to Bookcraft because they were my publisher. And the president then called me in and he said, this is against the counsel of some of the staff, but he said, there's just no market for Mormon fiction. And again, I thought, oh, boy. So I sent it to Deseret Book, and they said, yeah, we like it, and they'll take it. So so we went back and forth, and it was...
So where did the work and the glory come from? Because I remember the era where people lined up outside bookstores to purchase that book because it just resonated with them, and it opened history to them that they otherwise would probably never engage in. Well,
let me preface that with saying that until I get an idea that really resonates with me, I can't do a book, particularly in fiction. And it doesn't have to be all fleshed out and everything. So all along, while I'm writing some of these other novels, I'm thinking, the story of the Restoration is a great story. And then I'd think, it's so huge. I just don't even want to tackle it. And we still got kids going on missions, and, so there's that need to keep some books coming. So I just never really seriously considered it. And then one day, a man who had been a contributor to church education asked my boss if I would ever be willing to talk to him. And so he flew up from North Carolina, and he was a convert to the church, and he said that he had a strong feeling that someone needed to write a historical fiction on the story of the Restoration. And would I consider doing that? Found out later he'd gone to the bookstore and bought every Mormon novel he could find, and he liked some of mine. And here again, so grateful that the Lord doesn't let you go your own way sometimes. I told him I was too busy. I said, it's a huge project. I'm working on another project. And thanks very much for your confidence, but I just really am not interested. He told me later he was really ticked. But he didn't give up. And so he just kept saying, just consider it, And I finally said, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll take a day and I'll go off by myself and I'll fast and pray about it. And I'll see what the Lord wants me to do. And I came back that night and called him and said, okay, we're on. And that's how it started.